This is the Millennials in Multifamily Podcast, brought to you by Kronos Investment Partners. We interview industry experts to unlock key information that will help young professionals break into the multifamily world in order to create long-term and short-term wealth. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a rating and written review so we can reach more listeners. You can also follow us on our Facebook page at Kronos Investment Partners.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Millennials in Multifamily Podcast. I'm your host, John Stover, with my co-host, Fritz Ritter, and today our guest is Robert Benenati. Robert has been a real estate investor and property manager for over 2 decades. During that time, he's become an expert in both asset management and construction management, as you'd expect from someone who's managed over 10,000 units. He also has his own company called Strategic Property Solutions, which helps investors with due diligence on their own properties. Robert Benenati, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Millennials and Multifamily Podcast. Could you just give us and our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and how did you get into real estate and property management?
Yeah, first of all, thank y'all for having me on. So real estate always has been my passion. I started in 30 years ago in a big box store, Home Depot, and really just started throughout the store, learning everything I could. I started doing things on the side and did them by hand. So I was doing a lot of contract work. I worked for Depot for 12 years, worked for Lowe's for 10 years. I was on a commercial side, so I dealt with nothing but contractors, commercial businesses, worked up into corporate. So I was corporate, oversaw 14 stores in 2 states, Southeast Louisiana and Mississippi. And I dealt with national accounts and helped the store increase sales and deal with big, large companies. And then went into property management, left Lowe's. I was picked up by an investor for a large portfolio that had 7,000 units. That's where I met my wife. And I oversaw 39 apartment complexes in 6 states over maintenance, construction, and just showed I was eager to learn more, and eventually oversaw all the management also. So hired, fired property managers. That portfolio, that investor started selling off, liquidating, got into a thing with the partner and started selling off all the properties. And I got picked up by another investor in New Orleans, closer to home. And now I oversee 600 units for this investor, residential and commercial, from office buildings to retail, warehouses, and then also development. So I oversee a 72-unit apartment complex that we are converting to condos at this present time.
So pretty much you've done everything on the management side.
A little bit. That's on the W-2 side. And then on personal, I also have single family duplexes. I've flipped houses. Did a little bit of everything on the personal side also. And I've always did things on a side of W-2 to just move ahead in life and expand in real estate. I always had a passion for it.
And you do some due diligence consulting too, right?
Yes, I do. So me and my wife have a consultant business, strategic property consulting.
All right. That's good stuff. I would love to get more into due diligence because that's a huge process of, acquiring properties. So I'm curious, could you just talk about what is your due diligence process like? I know a lot of investors, they have 2 stages of it where there's the pre-LOI due diligence, so before they've even sent out an offer, and then the real due diligence begins once they've put the property under contract. Can you just talk about what you're doing before you've even submitted an offer when you go and look at a property? What can you do even?
Sure. The biggest thing is obviously getting the T12, getting the rent roll, and and finding out what the expenses are. You want to go through, you want to make sure that you can tell a lot about from the rent roll with the tenants, as far as if they're long-term tenants, if they're short-term tenants, security deposits. You can tell a lot about from the rent roll. So obviously, if you have a lot of new tenants uh, moving in, you're going to have more turnover. It kind of gives you that play. So you want to put maybe a little bit more expense on your turnover. And then your expenses, you want to look for, lawn care. You want to look for, um, pool care, any contracts you want to talk about or look for laundry, if it's a service or they own it. So a lot of those things you want to know what amenities, if they have, pools, tennis courts, a gym. And then you also want to see, who's taking care of that. So you want to look at the maintenance staff. Um, and then really depending on how many units depends on what the staff you should have. So a lot of those things is what you would look before, putting in an LOI. And yeah, that's what you would look at initially.
So Robert, I wanted to ask you, what are some things that may stand out on the rent roll T12 that'll kind of give you that background story or show you some red flags? What are some things to look out for when you're just looking at the numbers?
On a rent roll, really looking at, like I said, mainly the lease term. On the expenses, you also want to see, if they paying market rate, if they put up a security deposit. Security deposit is very important. A lot of the lower end, like a class D, class maybe C minus, they do a lot of, move-in specials, $99 move-in specials, or move in with no security deposit. That's actually really bad because a lot of people move in, and then of course they may, wreck the place, and you have nothing to fall back on for the damages. But it kind of gives you a sense of what kind of clientele you're picking up. So that's one of the things. And then you obviously want to look at your delinquents. You want to see what your collections are to make sure that people are paying. Yeah. So that's pretty the biggest thing. Mm-hmm.
So in a situation like that, let's say there's high delinquency and low security deposits, is there anything you also look at to determine if that's a sign of mismanagement or if that's more the neighborhood?
It could be a little bit of both. Obviously, delinquents, I would say bad management. Obviously, before COVID, I mean, COVID, they have a lot of, hardship right now. So your delinquents may be a little bit higher. But before, I mean, by the 5th of the month, you should be, 95% collected. And, especially some areas, eviction law is not as strict as it is in some other areas. So the biggest thing is with anything is really know your market, really know your surroundings, know what, what kind of specials, that kind of thing. So you want to definitely know the market before looking at that.
Go ahead. You answer my question.
Right.
Okay. We'll cut that. And then so on the physical side of the property, when you actually go and look at it the first time, what are you doing before you submit that offer and you can really get in all the units and like examine all the systems?
So the pre due diligence sort of walk, what I like to do is honestly get there before anybody even knows you're there. So if you do schedule a broker tour, try to get there, a day before, maybe even a couple of hours before, to see what the everyday activity is around that property. Obviously, if you go there and you show up 5 minutes before a broker tour, or you're gonna walk with a property manager, they're gonna have everything cleaned up. You're gonna have all that spotless. They may even have the grass cut. So try to get there before. But if you don't, the big things that I look for is your big ticket items. You want to make sure that the first thing I always look at is your roof. So look at your roofs, look at the structure of the property, making sure that there's no foundation issues, there's no cracks in the brick or whatever siding they have. Vinyl siding's kind of hard to see that, but you want to look at the balconies, you want to look at the woodwork, um, um, all your amenities. So obviously your pools, your tennis court, playgrounds, sidewalks, to make sure that they're safe. A lot of those things are going to be either big ticket items, or it's going to affect like your insurance. It's going to affect how your contracts are, if you're doing lawn care or if you're doing it in-house. So mainly the big ticket items. Also, one of the big thing also is HVAC. So know where your condensers are if it's a split unit. So you have an outside unit. So if it's on the roof, to service them, it's going to be more. To install a new one, it's going to be more. They're going to have to get ladder jacks or lifts. So all that kind of comes into play with the expenses.
And are you doing anything with the interiors in this pre-LOI stage?
A lot of times when I walk through, they're going to show you the prettiest, the nicest unit. And every time I walk, I said, I really want to see the ugliest. And a lot of times they don't show you that. The last one I did in Jackson, obviously, we don't have one of those. I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, we'll figure in that you have some, because every apartment complex has, a harder turn than others. I don't want to see the show units. I mean, it may give us a visual of what it could look like, or, what upgrades they may be doing to get the higher rent, which is good to see. But I really want to see, the bad units, because that's going to affect how much it's going to take to, do a turn, if they're harder turns or if they're a down unit, anything like that. It's definitely going to, affect your expenses.
So what are some of the qualities of a harder turn? What makes it a harder turn than the show units?
The harder turns are going to be more water leaks, mold, which that's the bad word in multifamily, but I never say that word, honestly. I'm like, oh, you mean mildew? So, but anyway, I stay away from that word. But obviously, if people see it's discoloration and it's to the darker side or black, that's something that needs to be addressed. And the biggest thing is, when people see that, is not just to address that, but to know where it came from. And that's what a lot of people don't see, is that, oh yeah, well, we're going to bleach this up, we're going to clean the caulking, and we're going to do that. But where did it come from? So obviously it had a water leak somewhere. So if it's coming from the ceiling, it's coming from upstairs, you want to make sure you put that in expenses, and you want to make sure that that's something that wants to be addressed. But most of your harder turn is going to be from water leaks. You may have to change cabinets out. You may have to, change the flooring. Ceiling may have had a roof leak. So that gives you a sign that your roof is failing. So a lot of those things, but as far as painting, that kind of thing, that's really minimal. You're going to do that in every unit, most likely. But your big ticket items, again, is going to be interior. Is going to be your cabinets, your flooring, your HVAC. So you want to make sure your air handlers inside look good. They're newer. Your appliances. Everything that you want to really do in due diligence is going to be your bigger ticket item. If you miss one AC or one water heater, one water heater could be, a $600 mishap. or HVAC could be a $3,500, $4,000 that you may have to change. So you really want to be eye opens to the bigger ticket items, not necessarily your painting.
So let's say now you or one of your clients actually puts one of these buildings under contract. Could you walk us through what the real due diligence process is like?
So the real due diligence, you want to have multiple people with you, because you're gonna have your interior walkthroughs, you're gonna have your exterior walkthrough, you're gonna have your lease audits, you're gonna have your financial audits. So what that entails, like I was saying, the interior, you want to just see, if there's any water leaks, any issues with that. And see what the overall condition is. The exterior, you want to make sure that your roofs get an idea of what your age is. One thing that I want to back up on is your pre-walkthrough. If you do see signs of roof issues, you want to make sure for your due diligence you also have a roofer. Your plumbing, when you walking on a walkthrough, you want to make sure that you try to go on a sunny day when it hasn't rained. That's not always possible, but the reason why, you want to make sure that there's not water puddling anywhere around the property. A lot of times that could be a water leak, or a sewer leak, or a cracked pipe underneath the ground. So those are some of the big things that you want to look at on a so you want to bring your plumber, make sure that you have a plumber. Your panels, your electrical panels, you want to make sure that those are breakers. So you want to probably bring an electrician. So some of these things that you're going to kind of see in your pre-due diligence, but you're going to have those people with you also on a after LOI, under contract, due diligence walkthrough. So that's kind of with the outside. The lease audit, what you want to look for is that it matches with the rent roll. A lot of people, they'll post, that this one's occupied, 105 is occupied, and then you get in, it's vacant, but then they may have a lease, or they may not have a lease, or they have it occupied but doesn't have a lease. All that really comes into play, not only having an accurate rent roll, but also, your expenses, your income, your delinquents. If you have 2 or 3 months that it's delinquent, they may not have anybody in that unit. So a lot of those things, that's your time when you take all that information and you just compare notes, and a lot of it adds up. A lot of times it doesn't.
So when you're doing let's go back to the physical due diligence here, and let's start with the interiors. Who are you bringing with you to check the unit interiors, and who are you bringing someone else to maybe check like the mechanical room if a property has one of those?
Yeah, I like to grab like a maintenance guy, try to separate them from the property manager. Most of the time, the property manager will be in the office doing the lease audit. So your maintenance, the maintenance usually knows the ins and outs of the property. So a lot of times you can just talk to them, get friends with them, and they'll tell you if they have plumbing issues. They'll tell you if they have an electrical issue. A lot of times they'll tell you if it's aluminum. And then you can also talk to them and say, okay, well, if you got aluminum, are you doing any, preventative? So on aluminum, you have to use certain outlets. You have to use certain wire nuts. So the maintenance guys can really tell you a lot about the property. Just real quick, I went and seen a property just last weekend. The maintenance guy showed up, and he told me, I couldn't believe he told me this, but he was truthful. He said, well, the owner hired me, and he asked me if I knew anything about maintenance, and he said no. He said, well, here's the keys. You can go figure it out, and you can give us a call if you really get stuck, and you can look at YouTube. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I'm like, that alone right there tells me that there's a lot of deferred maintenance without seeing any units. So, and he's telling me he's working on ACs. I'm like, are you certified? I'm like, nope. I'm like, so, that on my underwriting, that expense and that preferred maintenance, you definitely want to add to that, just because you're going to find things that weren't done correctly. So yeah, talking to the staff can really tell you a lot about the property.
So just to be clear, YouTube is not acceptable for maintenance tech.
No.
So Robert, is there any like third party inspections that you have to start getting ready as you start this due diligence process, or is that more towards the end? Kind of
Far as what?
as far as like scoping the lines or like maybe getting that environmental test or anything else that you may think that where you have to order a report on.
Yeah, so that kind of comes back on the age of it. Aluminum, I'm talking aluminum, you won't see that in 80s units or 90s. You'll see that mid-September, mid 70s, even before 70s, you really won't see it. Service wiring, that kind of thing. Environmental, the same thing. If you're looking at an 80s unit, you probably won't see asbestos, lead paint, that kind of thing. So it really depends on the property itself. Most of the time, the age. But if there is some things that you've seen, in the age of it, or even in your pre-walk, that's something that's when you want to make those calls and make sure that you are digging into those things before you do the due diligence.
Are there any contractors or vendors you're always bringing no matter what? Because what if you're dealing with a sophisticated seller and he's able to hide the fact that there's no electrical problems or plumbing problems in plain sight?
Well, the scoping is something that I would always recommend, because obviously you can't see that. Electrical is pretty much the same thing, especially if like you maintenance. Um, Never have done it before. You want to bring your electrician to check that. There's other devices that you can use for outlets. It's an outlet. It basically, you plug it into the outlet. It tells you on the lights if it's hooked up correctly. So there's a lot of things that you can do yourself, but I always would recommend anyone that especially doesn't know construction is to get a license plumber, roofer, electrician, plumber, yeah, HVAC. HVAC's a big thing too.
Do you recommend making some sort of checklist or finding one so you don't miss any of this? Because this seems like a whole bunch.
It is. I do have a list that I've been going through. The biggest things are going to be the big ticket items. If you think of anything that's going to be a big ticket item, just like I said, your roof, your HVAC. Just to touch on HVAC real quick, and boilers and chillers, you want to know or look at every one of them just to see what the age is. Boilers and chillers, they'll have serial numbers that you can look at that'll give you basically an age of it also. But the one big thing about HVAC is that your coolant. So you have your R22 units that are being phased out. So when you change those out, you basically have to change the whole unit out. There's ways that you can change the outside condenser, and there's different blends. I won't really get into that, but if one of your ACs or HVAC system, your split systems go out, and you may not be able to get an R22 unit, you're going to spend $4,000 changing it, $5,000, really depending on what size unit you're talking about. That's a big ticket item. You want to make sure that you have somebody with you checking those things out.
So for the most part, though, are you just doing your physical due diligence with a good property inspector? And then as things come up during inspections, hiring professionals to really identify the problem?
Yes, and it really depends on your experience. I'm gonna tell everyone is to hire someone that's experienced, someone that's licensed. I've been in the field for a long time. I've inspected my own houses, my own properties, apartments. I know what to look for. But I will recommend to anyone to get someone that really knows that that profession or that contract, um, to look at it a lot thorough. I mean, obviously, I couldn't do every one, so yes, I would definitely hire it also.
Are you struggling to understand how to underwrite multifamily properties? Hi, I'm John Stober, and I completely understand your problem. I thought underwriting would come naturally to me due to my background in finance and accounting, but I quickly found out that there aren't a lot of resources that cover this subject. I had no idea whether what I was doing was right, wrong, or just original. I don't want you to have to pick up little nuggets here and there like I did. So I wrote an ebook called How to Analyze Big Apartment Buildings and Make Them Feel Small that puts together all the pieces of the puzzle. We're also giving away a deal analyzer with the ebook, and they're both completely free. Don't wait as long as I did to start chasing financial freedom. Go to bit.ly/underwriting ebook and get your free copy today. What's the most common mistake you see investors make during physical due diligence, or the thing that's overlooked most often, I guess?
Um, I would really say it really depends. I mean, I've seen people overlook a lot of things. Um, if you go in and you look at the big ticket items, that's going to catch most of it. Um, like I said, putting lipstick on a pig is just paint. I mean, I wouldn't even worry about that. A lot of people look at, properties and say, "Oh my God, that's horrible looking. I'm not going to buy that." Well, that's just minor. That's totally minor. You want to look at what's going to cost you the biggest amount. If you mess up on those big ticket items, that's going to throw your numbers off. Lease audits and making sure that, your leases are matching up with, somebody in the unit. That's another big one, because obviously your rent, coming in, that's going to be your cash flow, your NOI, all that's going to affect. So you want to make sure when you do take over a property that you're starting off with a clean slate, that those numbers are going to add up and they're going to be accurate when you start off. Matter if it's a lot less than what you thought it was going to be or not. You want to make sure that you're starting off with an accurate number and accurate condition that you thought it was in.
That goes great into my next question. So let's say there are mishaps in the leases, either they're vacant and they say they're occupied, or the rent doesn't match. What are some things you can do at that point? Or let's say the owner pockets it's cash. It's not like transactional. How do you handle something like that?
I mean, obviously, I would bring all that up. Anything that doesn't add up. A lot of your owners and even brokers, and I'm not going to badmouth them, but they're there to sell the property. They're there to, property management company. They're there to make money managing. You're there to buy a property, and you're there to make money off of that property. So everybody has their agenda. So that's why it's very important that you bring the right people for your due diligence. Make sure that you're as accurate as possible. There's a lot of times that you're going to miss a little things here and there. But again, just really trying to get as accurate as you can is going to be the biggest thing. And looking for the bigger ticket item is going to be the big thing. So that's what I would say on that. Does that answer the question? Good enough?
Yeah, no, it did.
All right.
So I wanted to move into then financial due diligence, because there's tons of checklists out there for physical due diligence to help people figure out what to look for when they walk a property. I feel like financial is kind of glossed over a lot of time. Just like, check the T12, get the tax returns. But what's your process when you're doing financial due diligence on a property?
So my process is in the financial, I guess what you're getting at is more of the contract. So looking for, who your contracts are, who your contractors are working on the property, why they're working. Obviously maintenance, they're making $15 an hour. You can utilize them um, to cut grass or to do other things. You can also hire maintenance as a HVAC, a licensed HVAC. So I guess what I'm getting at is making sure that you're utilizing your staff, first of all. And if they are HVAC certified, making sure that they're doing the HVAC work and that they're not contracting it out. So you're talking about paying someone that's an HVAC maintenance guy maybe $20 an hour or if they're, and you have that on the property, um, but the owner or the management company is hiring a HVAC company. I mean, it's going to be 3 times the expense. So that's one thing you want to look at. You also want to look at the contracts. So your bigger properties, you're going to have lawn care. So if they come in, they cut the grass, you want to make sure you overlook all the lawn care, the contract, making sure how many cuts they do, what it entails. So a lot of them, they'll do down here in the South, grass grows almost 12 months of the year. So, so it's going to be 29 cuts, 30 cuts, really depending on where you are. Up by you, obviously it may only grow, 10 weeks or I don't know, but I'm just saying, look at the contracts and make sure that it's something that, kind of justifies what your maintenance guys are doing and what your contractors are doing. And then also look and see what it includes. So just cutting grass is cut grass. It doesn't mean that they trimming the bushes. A lot of times they'll put that in as, once a month or once every 2 months. But if you have 4 or 5 maintenance guys, you may be able to take that off of the lawn care company and get your maintenance guys to do it. They may not be worth giving snips to cut bushes or whatever, but I mean, that's some things you want to look at and make sure that what the contract entails. Um, Laundry, you want to make sure if it's laundry, if it's owned by the owner or it's under contract. Um, and a lot of the big difference between owning and having it under contract, you don't have to service them, but you do most of the time pay 40%, 30%, really depending on what the contract is. That's how much you pay into that service company. But you don't own the machines. If you do own the machines, then you service them yourself. You get 100% of the laundry money. So a lot of those things you want to make sure that are with the contracts, what it covers and what it doesn't.
So how are you verifying that the numbers on the T12 are real? Are you checking bank statements, or are you checking certain bills, like calling the utility company and grabbing the invoices?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would grab invoices, call insurance companies. Insurance is almost a whole nother ball game. When you're doing your walkthroughs, you want to make sure that you don't have trip hazards. If you have pools, obviously that's going to be more. You want to make sure that the insurance is covering for what you have on that property also. Um, Aluminum wire, that's just a totally different ball game with insurance. They're going to want you to remediate the aluminum wiring. Um, so what else? Taxes. Call up, find out what the taxes are and when they increase. Different states, increase every 4 years. Some of them are 2 years. So they reevaluate those. So you want to see what that trend is for that area. And a lot of this goes back on knowing your market and knowing kind of what that dollar amount or what that amount is going to be for, for that thing that you're checking out on the financials.
So I feel like that's very forward looking. Like, what are the taxes going to be? And what's the insurance quote going to be? But like, how do you actually verify that the numbers they put on their T12 in the past are accurate and they didn't just make that up?
Well, you can check with the tax assessors, all that public record. So you can just easily look on that and you can find that the tax assessors for that county or that area. But all that's public record.
And then for, I know a big item is the repairs and maintenance and the capital expenditures. When you're looking at that T12, I mean, I've seen financial statements where they're budgeting, well, not budgeting, but like they'll have like $100 a unit a year for repairs and maintenance. And it's some building built in like the 70s. What are you doing to gauge what that number will be in the future? And also, like, how are you identifying if they're putting what should be in repairs and maintenance in capital expenditures so that way they're artificially increasing NOI?
Far as what kind of improvements once you get it is what you're talking about?
Well, so I'm trying to figure out what my repair and maintenance budget should be when I buy it. And I don't want to use their number on the T12 because I'm just like, that's way too low. There's no way I'm only going to spend $170 a unit a year on some building in the 1970s.
Right.
But I can't go off their T12 because it's just like, it's way too low. What are you doing in the financial due diligence to kind of like come up with your own number? And that could have something to do with the physical too, because it's the repairs.
Well, there's a couple of things that I look for. First of all, you want to see what do they have in the units. So if they have carpet, obviously get rid of the carpet where you can. That is probably one of the biggest things that you can do to improve your units. Because not only if you still have carpet, you either have to clean it or replace it every time they move. Vinyl flooring is, you pay $2. I paid $2 a square foot installed. But once it's down, it's literally your maintenance is going in there. They're mopping, sweeping it, and it's done. I've had flooring last 4 or 5 years, probably even more. So, the turnover, not only you cutting out your labor after you put it down, but your time that your maintenance is going to be in there. Using the same paint. We talked a little bit about that. There's a lot of companies I went to and properties I went to. I said, use the same exact paint, same exact finish, same exact company. When they go through, somebody comes through and they move out, you have that same color, same finish, you touch up and you go. The maintenance, it cuts out so much time instead of going in and, painting a whole unit. So that's kind of what turnover. So your turnover, you also want to look at your T12. See, like I was mentioning, if you have a lot of new tenants coming in, to me, it sounds like they have a lot of turnover. At first, it may be a lot of turnover, and that's when you want to make those improvements. But, your expenses, I usually figure about $400-$500. Older properties, again, it really depends on, you may have to update some of the plumbing, the P-traps and underneath the cabinets. A lot of them over the years, older properties, they've had water leaks, but they didn't fix it correctly. So a lot of those things on the age, again, really depends on your expenses also.
When you said 400 to 500, is that per unit per year or is that per turn?
Well, that's per turn, but per year I would figure per unit.
Okay.
Yeah.
You good, Fritz?
Yeah, that's just with maintenance.
Yeah, no, that's the turnover stuff.
Right.
Okay. Well, Robert, I wanted to get to our next section of the show that we call the Fast Five. It's the same 5 questions we ask every guest that comes on. And so if you're ready, we'll get right into that.
Sure.
All right. So question number 1 is, if you were in your early 20s and you had to start all over again, how would you do that?
I would really find other people in this field and learn everything you can. Learn from conventions, learn from books. Team up with some others that have done it before. Just real quick, I was in a big box store, and it's nothing like doing it hands on too. So if you do not only do the book smart, read books, is to get out there and get into the community, get into apartments, and learn it firsthand. Um, at the actual properties.
That's a great idea. I'm a learner by doer myself, so that's great advice from me.
Yeah.
Question number 2: how do you see young professionals adding the most value to experienced operators in this space?
I guess one of my weakness, and young millennials like y'all, I'm sure y'all have heard this before, is y'all technology. It's incredible what technology can do. Um, not only with software, with due diligence, and just technology, marketing is just incredible what it's really going to. So the younger generations is definitely a big plus for somebody old school like me. So
Score 1 for the millennials.
there you go. Yeah.
Okay, so question number 3 is, what's the biggest mistake you've made in your career, and how have you since adjusted your business?
One of the biggest I would say is taking action. Seeing and talking to people, and you can read and you can be in this field, but if you don't take action and make a difference and keep moving forward every day, you're never going to get to your goal. That's one of the biggest things that I've improved on in recently, the last few years, is really taking action and not listening to others.
Love that, man. What's been your favorite way to incorporate technology or social media into your business, or do you just look to the millennials to do it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Facebook, I'm pretty big on Facebook. I've been kind of slacking lately, but, trying to get more things done. But, about a year and a half ago, I hated Facebook. I didn't like it. And I went to a conference and started networking, and it was one of the biggest things and best things I could have ever done. Your network is your network. And, really connecting with people on Facebook and LinkedIn and all those things is, really, I've become really good friends with a lot of people and really learned from other people through social media. But that is definitely something I would do. But just cut out all the political and all the drama, cut all that out, defriend people, and that's what I've done. So it makes a big difference, and it's a very big learning platform with social media. Learned
Hopefully
that.
it'll get better once the election's over.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think
Right.
a lot. I hope so. But,
Yeah, Facebook used to be such a great place.
You can find out what type of potato you are. That's what I liked it for.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, and Robert, last question is, what book has been most influential to you along your journey?
One of the biggest things, and I know you've heard this, so a lot of people have mentioned it, is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I've got 4 daughters. I've got 5 grandkids now and another one on the way. And, I recently posted on Facebook that somebody posted it, but anyway, I shared it where I forwarded and I tagged my daughters and said I'm going to assign them a book, and it could be real estate, but the first one is Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I want them to know what money is. And one of my daughters, I was just talking to her yesterday, and she, quarter through it already. And I said, well, I have one question for you. I said, have you learned this in college? Now, she's a teacher. And I said, have you learned any of this in college? And she said, not a bit. So that is definitely the book I would recommend anyone and everyone to read or listen to Audible. I'm not a big reader, but I've got Audible, and I'm actually listening to this book again. But there's so many different books out there. But really just get your niche, but start off with that one if you haven't read it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Robert, thanks so much for joining us on today's episode of the Millennials and Multifamily Podcast. For anyone who wants to reach out to get in touch, learn more about due diligence, or hire you for due diligence, what would be the best way for them to do that?
My email, rns4investment@gmail, or you can look us up, Strategic Property Consultant, or I'm on Facebook, and I also have a Facebook group. It's a multifamily asset management and value add, and I've created that with and shared a lot of education, and a lot of people are posting things and just kind of grow together.
All right, Robert. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Millennials in Multifamily Podcast, brought to you by Kronos Investment Partners. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and a written review at iTunes so that we can connect with more people. You can also connect with us on Facebook at the Kronos Investment Partners page. Finally, head on over to kronosinvestmentpartners.com and sign up for our newsletter so you can stay updated on everything we're doing. If you're interested in partnering with us as we find new opportunities, you can also schedule a phone call with us under the Contact Us tab at kronosinvestmentpartners.com.